The first snowflakes began to fall on a Tuesday evening in late November, and by Thursday morning, the world outside my log cabin had transformed into something from a fairy tale. I stood at the kitchen window, steaming mug of coffee in hand, watching the snow accumulate at an alarming rate. The weather forecast had predicted a significant storm system moving through the mountain valley, but even the meteorologists seemed surprised by the intensity of what was unfolding. My off-grid log cabin, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines and aspens, had become my sanctuary over the past 3 years. Built with my own hands from locally sourced timber, it represented everything I had dreamed of when I decided to leave the chaos of city life behind. The 20- by 30-foot structure, with its hand-hewn logs and traditional chinking, had weathered to previous winters admirably, but this storm was testing every joint, every seal, and every preparation I had made. The snow was falling so heavily that I could barely make out the woodshed, a mere 50 feet from the cabin. The wind howled through the trees with a ferocity that made the cabin walls groan and creak in response. I had experienced winter storms before, but nothing quite like this. The local weather service was calling it a once-in-a-decade event, with snowfall rates of up to 4 inches per hour and sustained winds of 40 miles per hour, with gusts reaching 60. I took inventory of my situation with the methodical approach that off-grid living had taught me. The wood-burning stove in the main room was my lifeline, its cast-iron body radiating warmth throughout the open-concept living space. I had spent the better part of September and October cutting, splitting, and stacking nearly 8 cords of seasoned hardwood, primarily oak, maple, and birch, along with a generous supply of pine kindling. The woodshed held enough fuel to last through the harshest winter, and I had an emergency reserve stacked under a tarp on the covered porch. My water system consisted of a gravity-fed setup from a natural spring located uphill from the cabin. The intake was buried deep enough to prevent freezing, and the pipes were insulated and wrapped with heat tape powered by my solar battery bank. However, the real challenge would be maintaining the flow if the storm continued 4 days. I had filled every available container with water as a precaution, old milk jugs, canning jars, and even a few 5-gallon buckets lined up in the mudroom, orders awaiting orders. The solar panel array on the south-facing roof was my primary source of electricity, supplemented by a small wind turbine mounted on a 30-foot tower. The battery bank in the cabin's basement could store enough power for about a week of conservative use, but with the heavy cloud cover and snow accumulation on the panels, I would need to rely primarily on stored energy. I had already switched to essential systems only, LED lighting, the water pump, and the small refrigerator that kept my perishables fresh. By Friday morning, the storm had intensified beyond anything I had imagined. The snow had accumulated to nearly 3 feet in just 2 days, and the wind had sculpted massive drifts against the north side of the cabin. Some of these drifts reached nearly to the eaves, creating an almost surreal landscape where the familiar geometry of my property had disappeared under a blanket of white. The trees were bending under the weight of snow and ice, their branches creating an intricate network of frozen sculptures. I maintained my morning routine, despite the extraordinary circumstances. After stoking the fire and adding fresh logs, I prepared a simple breakfast of oatmeal with dried berries and honey, along with eggs from my small flock of cold hardy chickens. The hen house, constructed with extra insulation and a small heater powered by the solar system, had kept the birds comfortable even as the temperature dropped to -10 degrees Fahrenheit. The isolation was both beautiful and sobering. My nearest neighbor lived 5 miles away, and the mountain road that connected my property to the main highway was likely impassable. Cell phone service was spotty under the best conditions, and the storm had eliminated any hope of communication with the outside world. I was truly on my own, dependent entirely on my preparations and resourcefulness. Throughout the day, I monitored the cabin systems with the attention of a ship captain in a storm. The wood stove required feeding every few hours, and I had established a routine of checking the chimney for any signs of ice buildup or blockage. The heat from the stove created a comfortable 70-degree environment in the main living area, though the bedroom and bathroom had electric baseboard heaters to maintain reasonable temperatures. The snow continued to fall with relentless persistence. By Saturday evening, I estimated that over 4 feet had accumulated. Though the wind made exact measurements difficult, the drifts against the cabin had grown so high that I could no longer see out the north-facing windows. The constant sound of wind and the occasional crack of tree branches breaking under the weight of snow created a symphony of winter that was both beautiful and ominous. One of my greatest concerns was the potential for ice dams on the roof. The cabin's metal roofing was designed to shed snow, but the extreme accumulation and fluctuating temperatures could create conditions for ice formation. I had installed heating cables along the roof edges as a preventive measure, but I monitored them carefully to ensure they were functioning properly. The last thing I needed was water backing up and finding its way into the cabin's interior. Food preparation became an exercise in efficiency and creativity. My pantry was well stocked with canned goods, dried beans, grains, and preserved vegetables from my summer garden. The root cellar, built into the hillside behind the cabin, maintained a constant temperature just above freezing and housed potatoes, onions, carrots, and several varieties of winter squash. I had also invested in a substantial collection of freeze-dried meals and emergency rations, though I hoped not to rely on them extensively. The propane-powered range and oven allowed me to prepare hot meals without taxing the electrical system. I found myself cooking more elaborate meals than usual, partly for the comfort and warmth they provided, but also because the process of cooking occupied my mind and hands during the long hours of confinement. A pot of beef stew simmered on the back burner, filling the cabin with rich, savory aromas that competed with the scent of burning wood. Sunday brought a slight respite from the wind, though the snow continued to fall steadily. I took advantage of the calmer conditions to venture outside and assess the situation. The effort required to push open the door against the accumulated snow was considerable, and I immediately understood why mountain dwellers always kept shovels inside their homes. The cold hit me like a physical force, even through my insulated coveralls and winter boots. The landscape was otherworldly. The familiar landmarks of my property, the old apple tree, the fire pit, the garden beds, had disappeared under a uniform blanket of white. The snow was so deep that I sank to my waist with each step, making progress slow and exhausting. I managed to reach the woodshed and dig out enough fuel for several more days, creating a path that would hopefully remain usable if the wind didn't redistribute the snow. The solar panels were completely buried under snow, confirming my suspicions about the electrical system's limitations during the storm. I carefully climbed onto the roof, using a ladder, and cleared what snow I could, but the continuing precipitation made it a temporary solution at best. The battery bank showed a steady decline in charge, and I realized that power conservation would become increasingly critical in the days ahead. That evening, as I sat by the fire reading a well-worn copy of My Side of the Mountain, I reflected on the fundamental satisfaction of self-sufficiency. The storm had cut me off from the modern world's conveniences and safety nets, but it had also stripped away the distractions and anxieties that seemed to dominate contemporary life. There was something profoundly peaceful about the simplicity of my current existence. Keep the fire burning, maintain the water supply, prepare warm meals, and stay dry. The storm finally began to weaken on Monday morning. The snow had stopped falling, and the wind had diminished to occasional gusts. The silence was remarkable after days of constant noise. I stood on the porch, breathing in the crisp, clean air and marveling at the transformation of my familiar landscape. The snow had drifted to depths of 6 feet or more in places, completely reshaping the topography of my property. The task of digging out would be enormous. The driveway was impassable, buried under snow that would require days of work to clear. The path to the woodshed needed constant maintenance, and several other essential routes around the property would need to be established. But these challenges felt manageable now that the storm had passed. I had weathered the worst of it, and the cabin had performed admirably. As I worked to clear the solar panels and restore power generation, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The storm had tested every aspect of my off-grid systems and my own preparedness, and I had emerged successfully. The cabin had remained warm and dry, the water system had functioned without interruption, and I had maintained not just survival but comfort throughout the ordeal. The experience reinforced my appreciation for the careful planning and preparation that off-grid living requires. Every system had multiple backups, every resource had been calculated with generous margins, and every potential failure had been anticipated and mitigated. The storm had validated years of thoughtful design and meticulous preparation. Over the following days, as I gradually restored normal operations and began the long process of snow removal, I found myself looking forward to the next challenge. The winter was far from over, and this storm had been just the beginning. But my cozy log cabin had proven itself to be more than just a shelter. It was a fortress against the elements, a testament to human ingenuity and determination, and a sanctuary where I could thrive even in the harshest conditions nature could provide. The heavy snowfall had become not just a survival story, but a profound reminder of the rewards that come from choosing a life of self-reliance and connection with the natural world. In the warmth of my log cabin, surrounded by the tools and systems that had sustained me through the storm, I felt more at home than I ever had in the city. This was winter camping at its finest, not just surviving the elements, but embracing them as part of a lifestyle that offered challenges, rewards, and a deep satisfaction that could only come from living on one's own terms.